Hi, welcome to my training room. I'm Rainer. Today I'm going to give you a more thorough update of what I've done up in this area, what I'm calling my little river valley up in here. In my last video I gave a quick overview of the progress up to that point, and I've managed to get a little farther than that now. So I just thought I'd give you a more detailed kind of review of what I did to get it to this point. So what I've done here is I have essentially created some hills on both sides and created a valley up the middle that I've poured some water into. It's actually two-part resin. I'll go into that in a little bit of how I did that. But basically I've created a little valley in here, and I've got three crossings of that with three different bridges. And what we have over here, if you look at my earlier videos, this is my helix between the lower level, which is at this height down here, up to my upper deck. And just as a quick review of what happens, you can take a look at my earlier video that I show a tour of the line with a camera mounted on a train, where I go through the whole thing up to that point. I've done more since then, but it gives you an idea of what happens with the helix. But the trains enter the helix down there at the back from the lower deck. I haven't finished anything, it's just open, but eventually there's going to be a town scene in here with maybe some industry. But the trains enter the helix at the back, go around, and then they come up to the upper deck over on this side, just off the camera. They continue around the layout and come across at this lower level where this one locomotive is sitting right here, and continue across this little bridge that I've created, go across in front of this rock cut in here. They cross the line that came up from the helix and then continue around the room, gradually coming up, and then they come up to this level in here. And both of these tracks up here are at that level. They split. There's a switch right here where the trains have a choice of coming in this way across this curved trestle, or going around farther back and into that tunnel opening. Kind of the idea that I have here is that the main line comes up, continues, and goes around the back in front of that hill with the trees where that locomotive is coming out of that tunnel, and continues. There's a 22-inch radius loop which is stacked right on top of my helix, and it comes out there. And inside that mountain there is a switch back there, or a turnout, and the main line would continue straight and out across the other side and to my upper staging, which I haven't built yet, which is going to be 3 tracks of staging, which is going to be above my desk, above the duck under to get into the room. However, there is a alternative route for them. If they continue through the other leg of that switch or turnout, they would come out through this tunnel opening here and come back in here. This is going to be my kind of my tourist park scene up here, where the passenger trains can stop. Comes back, circles across this curved trestle, and then joins back onto the main line. So effectively what I've created is, with this second loop going around and cutting back into the main line, is I've created a turnaround loop. Anyway, that's the idea for the track plan. The other way that this could be used is, for example, if I've got a passenger tourist train, again, as I mentioned in my earlier videos, kind of like the Algoma Central had their tour trains daily, the train could come up here and stop here. Different than the ACR in that this is kind of off of the main line. They could stop here while the freights could continue through the other side and go into the upper staging. However, if I'm pulling the passenger train with a steam engine, it means that I don't have to turn the steam engine around here. I can just go around the turnaround loop and come back down the line going that way. That's the idea. Now, in terms of constructing this valley, you can see in my earlier videos, all of the track is laid on a plywood sub-road bed like this, with cork on top, and then the track laid on top of that. I've done that at all levels, so the the track, other than where it's crossing the bridge, as a plywood base underneath the cork. Now, for the construction of the hills, as you've probably seen in my earlier videos, if you've watched them, I used a styrofoam structure underneath, some chicken wire on top, plaster cloth on top of that, and then I brushed on a watery coating of drywall compound, sheetrock 20, which gives me a solid shell. That coating, the brown areas are just painted with a Glidden flat latex household paint, warm spice brown. I picked the color because it looked like dirt. Sorry if I'm offending anybody that has that color on their walls, but it looked like dirt, so I bought it. Before the paint dried, when I brushed the paint on, before it dried, I would sprinkle on some of this ground foam just to give me a little bit of texture on the ground for now. There's going to be more happening in it, but it just gives me a starting point. If I don't finish all of the scenery right now, at least it gives me something to look at that kind of looks like dirt and grass rather than white plaster. These cliff areas, this section was done by just pouring casting plaster into a wrinkled tray of tinfoil and then pulling it out, gluing it into place. All of this was brushed black with acrylic artist paint, out of a tube. Just painted it black, and then I dry brushed various shades of gray and white on top of it, just to make the texture pop out. And that's what I've done for all of my kind of cliffs and rock cuts. So this looks more like a rock cut. This looks like more just kind of I guess, just a rock surface. That's what I've done for all of the rock areas. Maybe not as realistic as what some people might do for rocks, but works for me. It's relatively inexpensive, really easy to do. Done the same thing in the rock cuts back there. In my earlier videos, I talk about how I built that bridge at the back, a deck girder bridge back there, as well as this curved trestle. That one is a micro-engineering kit. This one is a timber trestle, a Walthers kit that was designed as a straight trestle, but I built it as a curved trestle. You can look at my earlier video of how I did that. This short little bridge right here is actually just a leftover piece of the decking that I cut out of that bridge once I was cutting it to length to fit the gap that I had, so I just used it here to make a short bridge over the river. In terms of the river valley, my idea was that I wanted it to look like when you're looking down under the bridges that the river disappears off into the distance. Well, the reality is I have a wall right there. So what I did was I got on Amazon and I bought a pack of these little cheap mirrors. They're not glass, they're just flexible, shiny mirror kind of things. And I glued one to the wall down there. And when you look down the river valley now, you're not just looking at a wall, you're looking at a mirror. Now what I've done is if I go over here and position it down here, I can actually see myself in the mirror, except that that's why I have this tree and that tree positioned to obscure that view so that when you go down this way, it's not obvious that you're looking at a mirror at first glance. The other thing is that the mirror, when it's put in place down there, the top of the mirror is disguised by the height of that rear bridge as well as some overhanging trees that come over top. So it's also kind of in the shadows. So when you look down there, you just kind of see that it continues and it's not immediately obvious that you're actually looking at a reflection down there. So that was kind of, one of the little tricks. It's not my idea. I've seen this online on other YouTube channels, other people's layouts that they've used mirrors for hiding rivers and roads going off into the distance to add that sense of depth. So that's what I did. Pretty inexpensive, just get a little flexible mirror. It's not like I'm looking at it and trying to do my makeup or something in it. Although it actually doesn't look too bad. I think it'll scratch pretty easily, but back there, it's just there to provide the sense of depth, and it actually worked out quite well. what I needed to do is, because of the reach into that back corner, I did most of the scenery on that hill and put the trees in place before I put this curved trestle in, because I didn't want to damage the trestle leaning over it. I can actually, if I get a step ladder here, reach into that corner. It's not easy, it's not comfortable, but I can reach in there if I need to. But that's why I did most of the work beforehand. Then I put the trestles in place. Both this small bridge as well as the curved trestle have rails glued onto them. So I set those in place and then I laid the rest of the track. So at this point, the track is laid, ready to go. There are wires going to it. I have isolated sections where I need to, but there's no power going to them yet. That's why these trains are just sitting here and not running, because I still need to build a control panel for it. Now, I can't just run power to it directly like I've done for the rest of the top of the layout for a temporary purpose, because this section is essentially a reversing loop, and if I connect these rails to where they come off the track over there, I will create a short at that end, or it will be reverse polarity because it connects back into what's the inside track of my layout loop, connects to the outside track of the loop over there because it's a reversing loop. So I had to put an isolator, isolate this track at both ends, and I'm going to have to be able to put a polarity reversing switch on it so that when the train is crossing that joint over there, or that connection over there, that the polarity is reversed so we don't end up with a short. So that's why I got to build a control panel next and then run the power to them so that the reverse loop will work properly. So in an upcoming video, hopefully within the next week or so, I will have that done and I will show you how I wire it and how I do the switch to reverse the polarity, and what I'm planning to do for indicator lights as well for myself to know whether it's safe to run the train in there or not. In terms of the water itself, so I've got a small pond, if you want to call it here, and then the little river winding through, going up to my mirror. And so what I did was I fashioned all of the banks of the river initially with styrofoam that I carved down to a slope. And then I just put some latex caulking around the bottom edges of the where the styrofoam met the plywood, and also sealed all the joints, any joints in the plywood, with the caulking to make it essentially watertight or somewhat watertight. The same thing with the fascia here. I had to put the fascia on here, even though I haven't done fascia on the rest of the layout, because the water comes right up to the fascia, so I need to have some way of stopping it from running off the layout. Once I had the basic shape of the pond and the river ready with the styrofoam, I then brushed on some of my kind of watered down drywall compound mix and coated all the banks and the bottom of the lake and the bottom of the river with essentially a layer of drywall compound, plaster, whatever you want to call it, and let that harden and dry properly. Then I just painted everything, because I worked my way up from not just the pond, bottom of the pond, all the way up to the track. I just coated everything with a layer of my beautiful brown dirt colored latex paint that just helped seal it up a little bit more. And then I kind of guessed at where my water line was going to be, and then I painted the bottom of everything that's going to be covered in water with a mix of dark green and black acrylic paints, and just kind of, it's kind of a mottled, it's not all the same shade, because the bottom of any river or lake is not always even. So that's what I did with the whole thing, just painted the whole thing kind of up to where I figured the water was going to end roughly. And then I was ready for pouring the water in. Now, I also put a little bit of rocks in the river from essentially a jar of gravel that I bought at the dollar store that was this kind of a, I don't know if you can see it here, but it's kind of a dark gray little pebbles of gravel. And I'm just using the same things at the bottom of my rock cut here, but I put some of that in the river, just to add a little bit of rocks to the river. And then for my first pour of water, I had some leftover marine epoxy, West Systems marine epoxy, leftover from a boat repair building project I did a few years ago. It was just a small can that was starting to get rusty, and it had some, what they call their fast hardener. And so I thought, let's see if it works. I mean, I had it. It was just going to have to get thrown out sooner or later, so I thought I'd try it. And so I mixed that up, and I poured that in for my first layer of my river. That West System stuff is I think it's like a 5-to-1 mix, so five parts of the resin to 1 part of the hardener. I poured that in, and it hardened up okay. The only issue I had was two things. It wasn't deep enough, so it didn't cover the rocks that I put in the river. And the second thing was that after it cured for about 8 hours, it created like this weird film on the top that didn't look quite right. And so I think it might have been maybe because it's old hardener, maybe even the type of hardener, because I was using epoxy that wasn't really designed for this type of a thing. It was supposed to be for repairing boats to make them watertight. So then I got a pack of that Woodland Scenics deep pour murky, I think it's called. So I mixed that up. I just mixed the whole batch of it and poured it on top. You can see it in the video how I did this. Just poured it on top, and it was just enough to give me a coating to hide the rocks and to go down there, down to the end of the river. So let that set for 24 hours, and it came out looking really pretty good. Now what I did was once it had sat here for a little while, I noticed there was some bubbles forming in it, and I have a soldering iron that also has like a little hot air thing. It's like a super powered hair dryer. I wouldn't use it for a hair dryer, but I put it on the lowest heat I could on there, and then just went over the top of the lake and the river wherever I could see the bubbles, and just kind of warmed it up a bit and made the bubbles pop. And so I ended up with a nice bubble-free finish. I think a hair dryer on a low setting, as long as you're careful not to blow dirt into it, would work as well. So that's how I got all the water poured in there. Then I put the tracks in, as I mentioned earlier in the video. Now, I left all the tracks and the bridges out while I was pouring the water because I didn't want anything getting in my way while I was doing the pour. And then I waited for the water to harden so I wasn't getting dirt falling in while I'm doing it. So that's kind of the status of this upper deck at this point. And the next thing I need to do is build a control panel. I'll show that in another video, and how I end up wiring things to make the reverser loop work. And be really nice to get trains running up here again, because I haven't actually run a train on here in a few weeks since I've been working here, and my tracks have been covered with tools and everything else. So I think that's my update for now, and thanks for watching. If you want to see more, don't forget to subscribe and click the like button, and hopefully you've learned something from this. See you next time.